Welcome to Echoes of Eternity, where we dive into the timeless clash between ancient faith and modern discovery. Today, we're exploring a provocative question. Could the extraordinary lifespans of biblical and Quranic figures like Adam nearly 1,000 years or Noah's 950-year saga be more than metaphor? Science says no, with zero skeletal evidence of century-long lives from our vast archaeological digs. But here's the twist. We've barely scratched the ocean's surface, only 25% mapped, less than 0.001% visually explored. What if future submersibles unearth ancient skulls defying biology, validating these religious claims? Science doesn't deny, it demands proof. Join us as we unpack the evidence, the limits of exploration, and why absence isn't disproof. Is faith's golden age hiding in the abyss? Let's plunge in. Hi viewers, it's me Zahid again. Today's discussion is about unveiling longevity, myths, science, and the depths unknown. The Islamic tradition holds that many of our early ancestors lived for exceptionally long periods, such as Adam, who is said to have lived around 1,000 years, and Noah around 950 years. Are there any archaeological or scientific findings, such as human skeletons, that provide evidence for such extended lifespans? If such remains have been discovered, where were they found? And if not, is there still a possibility that the Islamic claim could be true?
No, there is no archaeological, skeletal, or scientific evidence of any human who lived for centuries, let alone 1,000 years as described for figures like Adam, around 9 to 30 years in Islamic and biblical traditions, or Noah, 950 years. Human skeletons from across history, including the oldest known remains of anatomically modern Homo sapiens, dated to over 300,000 years ago at sites like Jebel Irhoud in Morocco or Omo Kibish in Ethiopia, around 230,000, 195,000 years old, show clear biological markers of aging. These include dental wear, bone density loss, joint degeneration, and cranial suture closure, which allow forensic anthropologists to estimate age at death with reasonable accuracy, typically capping at 70-90 years for those who survived infancy and disease, and never exceeding about 122 years in verified modern cases, e.g., Jeanne Calment, 1875-1997. For example, Anglo-Saxon skeletons from 1,500 years ago, analyzed via dental wear, include individuals up to 75 plus, but the majority died before 65, with no evidence of centenarians beyond rare cases under 80. Paleolithic and Neolithic remains, from 30,000 plus years ago, similarly show maximum lifespans around 70-75 for adults, skewed lower by high infant mortality but unchanged in biological potential. No skeleton, ancient or modern, exhibits the physiological hallmarks, e.g., minimal cellular senescence or telomere shortening reversal, required for 900 plus years. Human biology limits us due to accumulated DNA damage, mitochondrial dysfunction, and organ failure, with a theoretical maximum around 125 years based on Gompert's mortality. Models and genetic studies. These long lifespans appear in religious texts like the Quran, like Noah's, preaching for centuries in Surah Al-Ankabut Surah 29, Ayat 14, interpreted as 950 years total, and Bible, Genesis 5-9, as symbolic or theological elements, possibly representing tribal eras, lunar solar calendar differences, or divine favor rather than literal biology. Similar myths exist in Sumerian, e.g., kings living 2,800 years, Indian and Chinese traditions, but none are substantiated by fossils or genetics. Human genetic diversity indicates a population never below 10,000 individuals for 100,000 plus years, contradicting a recent single-family origin like Noah's. Without physical evidence, the Islamic claim cannot be accepted as historically or scientifically true in a literal sense. Faith-based acceptance is possible if viewed metaphorically. For example, long life, symbolizing enduring legacy, or baraka, blessing. But empirical science requires testable proof, which is absent. Ongoing research into aging, e.g., via calorie restriction or gene editing, might extend modern lifespans to 150 years. but centuries remain biologically implausible without rewriting human physiology. Scientific evidence on human longevity, the slide. Claims of extraordinarily long lifespans for figures like Adam, around c. 931,000 years in Islamic and biblical traditions, and Noah, around ITRE 950 years, are rooted in religious texts, including the Quran. For example, Surah Al-Ankabut, Surah 29, Ayat 14 mentions Noah's 950 years of prophethood, and Hadith, as well as the Bible, Genesis. These are presented as historical or divine accounts in Abrahamic faiths. However, from a scientific and archaeological perspective, there is no empirical evidence supporting humans living for centuries. I'll break this down step by step, focusing on evidence from biology, anthropology, and paleontology. Biological limits to human lifespan. Human biology imposes clear limits on longevity. The longest verified lifespan in modern records is 122 years and 164 days. Achieved by Jean Calment, 1875-1997, confirmed through extensive documentation including birth records, census data, and medical verification. Aging is driven by telomere shortening, cellular senescence, oxidative stress, and genetic factors. Even with optimal conditions, no mammal, including humans, has been observed to exceed about 120-125 years. Studies from sources like the Gerontology Research Group and peer-reviewed journals, for example, Nature Aging, 2023 show that extreme longevity claims without records are debunked via cross-verification. In ancient times, average lifespans were shorter, 30-40 years, due to disease, injury, and poor nutrition, but maximums rarely exceeded 70-80 years, as seen in skeletal analyses. Archaeological evidence. Skeletons and age determination. No evidence of century-old skeletons. Archaeologists have excavated millions of human remains from prehistoric, for example, Neanderthals or 40,000 years ago, to ancient civilizations like Egyptian mummies, Roman burials. Age at death is determined using methods like skeletal markers, fusion of skull bones, complete by 25-30 years, wear on teeth and joints, and bone density, carbon-14 dating for the remains themselves, combined with histological analysis, for example, counting osteons in bones, isotopic analysis for diet and health. These consistently show no individuals over 100 years, let alone centuries. For example, the oldest known anatomically modern human skeleton, from Omo Kibish, Ethiopia, 33,000 years old, shows an adult but no longevity indicators beyond normal human ranges. In the Levant, biblical Islamic heartland, sites like Jericho, 9,000 BCE, or Göbekli Tepe, 11,000 BCE, yield remains with ages up to 70 years max. A 2022 study in Science Advances analyzed 1,000 plus ancient skeletons from the Near East and found no outliers beyond 80-90 years, attributing rare long lives to elite status, but still far short of centuries. Specific searches for long-lived. Claims. No verified ancient giant or long-lived skeletons matching these descriptions have been found. Hoaxes like 19th century Cardiff giant or manipulated photos have been debunked by institutions like the Smithsonian. Claims of elongated skulls, e.g., Paracas, Peru, are due to cranial deformation practices, not age or genetics, per DNA studies in PLOS 1, 2018. Where have we looked? Extensive digs in the Middle East, for example, Iraq, Israel, Turkey, regions tied to Abrahamic narratives, Africa, human origins, and globally. Projects like the Human Genome Project and ancient DNA sequencing, for example, from Natufian culture and 15,000 years ago, confirm consistent Homo sapiens biology with no superlongevity genes. Possible explanations for religious claims, non-literal interpretations. Many scholars, Muslim and otherwise, view these ages as symbolic, representing eras, dynasties, or spiritual significance rather than literal years. For instance, lunar versus solar calendars. Islamic lunar months, 29 days, could inflate solar year equivalents, but even adjusted, they don't reach centuries. Pre-flood eras. Some traditions suggest a different environment. For example, vapor canopy theory, debunked by geology, allowed longer lives, but no fossil or genetic evidence supports this. Cultural parallels. Similar long-life myths exist in Sumerian, like King List with 28,000-year reigns, Hindu, for example, Manu at 100,000 years, and Chinese texts, likely exaggerated oral histories or numerological symbolism. Lack of corroboration. No contemporary records, like inscriptions, artifacts from our 4,000–6,000 BCE, estimated timelines for Adam Noah, mention such figures or lifespans. The earliest writing, cuneiform, Jamar 3200 BCE, shows normal human ages. Chance of accepting the Islamic claim as true, scientifically. Unlikely, as it contradicts established biology and archaeology. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, Carl Sagan's principle, and none exists. Future discoveries, for example, undiscovered genes or remains, are possible but improbable. Human evolution stabilized 300,000 years ago, with no longevity mutation in the fossil record. Through faith. Yes, religious claims like these are matters of belief, not empirical proof. Islam encourages reflection on signs, Quran Surah 2 Ayat 164, but accepts divine miracles beyond science, like prophets' unique statuses. Many Muslims interpret these literally as part of Tawhid, God's will, while others see them metaphorically without conflicting with science. Acceptance depends on personal worldview. Science explains the how of the natural world, while faith addresses the why or supernatural. Balanced view. Sources like the Pew Research Center 2023 show most Muslims, were 80% in surveys, harmonize faith and science, viewing long ages as inspirational rather than historical facts. If new evidence emerged, like a verified 500-year-old skeleton, it would revolutionize biology, but none has. In summary, while these claims enrich religious narratives, they lack physical evidence like long-lived skeletons. Archaeology and science point to normal human limits, but faith allows for acceptance beyond material proof. If you're exploring this further, resources like the Bible, the Quran, and Science by Maurice Bukele or archaeological journals provide deeper dives.
Okay, that was a very detailed reply. Now I am going to ask, do other religions such as Hinduism, Judaism, or others also contain claims of extraordinarily long lifespans among early figures or prophets, similar to those found in Islamic tradition?
Yes, claims of extraordinarily long-lived ancestors, prophets, or mythological figures are common across many religions and ancient mythologies, often serving symbolic, theological, or cultural purposes rather than literal historical records. These narratives frequently emphasize divine favor, moral lessons, or the passage of eras. Below, I'll outline similarities in Hinduism, Judaism, and other traditions, drawing parallels to the Islamic accounts of figures like Adam and Noah. Judaism shares direct parallels with Islamic claims, as both draw from Abrahamic traditions rooted in the Hebrew Bible, Tanakh Torah. The Book of Genesis lists antediluvian, pre-flood, patriarchs with lifespans far exceeding modern human biology. Adam lived 9 to 30 years. Seth, Adam's son, lived 9 to 12 years. Methuselah, Noah's grandfather, holds the record at 969 years. Noah lived 950 years, including 350 after the flood. These ages decrease post-flood, like Abraham at 175 years, Moses at 120 years, which some interpretations link to a divine limit set in Genesis 6, verse 3. My spirit shall not abide in mortals forever, for they are flesh. Their days shall be 120 years. Jewish scholars often debate whether these are literal or symbolic, for example, representing lunar months, generations, or moral eras, but they mirror the Quranic Hadith accounts of the same figures. This extreme longevity is admired in Jewish texts as a sign of closeness to God, similar to Islamic views of barakah, blessing, in prophets' lives. Hinduism. Hindu scriptures feature even more expansive claims of longevity, often tied to cosmic cycles called yugas, ages of the world. In the earliest yuga, Satya Yuga, humans reportedly lived up to 100,000 years with perfect health and virtue, gradually declining to about 100 years in the current Kali Yuga. Specific figures include ancient rishis, sages, and kings in epics like the Mahabharata and Ramayana, where characters like Lord Rama, an avatar of Vishnu, are said to have lived for thousands of years. The concept of Chiranjeevi, long-lived or immortal beings, with 7 or 8 figures destined to remain alive until the end of Kali Yuga, potentially millions of years. Examples: Hanuman from the Ramayana, a devotee of Rama, believed to be eternally alive in the Himalayas. Ashwatthama, cursed with immortality but eternal suffering. Vyasa, compiler of the Vedas, said to live through cycles. Others like Parashurama, Vibhishana, Kripacharya, and King Mahabali. These are not just ancestors but divine or semi-divine beings, emphasizing dharma, duty, and the eternal nature of the soul, akin to how Islamic texts use long lives to highlight prophetic endurance. Unlike Abrahamic religions, Hindu longevity often blends with reincarnation and immortality through moksha, liberation. Other religions and mythologies. Similar motifs appear in various traditions worldwide, often in foundational myths about ancestors or heroes. Christianity directly inherits the Jewish Torah's accounts, Old Testament, with the same patriarchal lifespans as in Judaism and Islam. Post-flood figures like Abraham, 175 years, and Isaac, 180 years, continue the theme, interpreted literally by some denominations and allegorically by others. Sumerian, Babylonian, Mesopotamian mythology. As precursors to Abrahamic stories, the Sumerian king list describes pre-flood kings ruling for tens of thousands of years, like Alulim at 28,800 years and Menluana at 43,200 years. Post-flood reigns shortened dramatically, paralleling the biblical Islamic flood narrative and Noah's longevity. Chinese mythology. Ancient emperors and sages like Peng Zhu, ancestor of longevity, reportedly lived 800 years, while the Yellow Emperor, Huangdi, ascended to heaven after 100+ years of rule. Taoist traditions emphasize elixirs for immortality, with figures like the 8 immortals achieving eternal life through cultivation. Greek, Roman mythology. Humans like Tithonus were granted immortality but not eternal youth, leading to endless aging. Gods and titans, for example, Cronus, were immortal, but heroic ancestors like Nestor lived exceptionally long, 3 generations worth, without reaching centuries. Norse mythology. Gods like Odin were long-lived but reliant on Adun's apples for youth. Jotnar, giants and ancestors could have extended lives, though not explicitly quantified as centuries. Indigenous and animistic traditions. Many cultures venerate ancestors as eternally present spirits, but literal long lifespans are less common. For example, Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime stories feature timeless creator beings, while African mythologies, e.g. Yoruba, have orishas, deities, with immortal essences. Across these, longevity often symbolizes a golden age or divine intervention, much like in Islam. However, as with the Islamic claims, no scientific evidence supports literal interpretations. They're viewed as mythological or metaphorical in modern scholarship. If you'd like details on a specific tradition, let me know.
I am going to ask next what changes occurred after the Great Flood that led to a reduction in human lifespans.
Biblical narrative on post-flood lifespans. The concept of human lifespans shortening after the Great Flood, Noah's flood, is primarily drawn from the book of Genesis in the Bible, which is shared across Judaism, Christianity, and to some extent Islam, via references to Noah in the Quran. The question assumes the flood as a cause, but religious texts and interpretations frame it more as a divine decision coinciding with or following the event. There is no scientific evidence for a global flood causing biological changes to longevity. Human lifespans have always been biologically limited to around 120 years max, as per modern gerontology, but from a theological perspective, here's what happens in the narratives and explanations for the shift. What the texts describe as happening. Pre-flood lifespans. Figures like Adam, 930 years, Seth, 912, and Methuselah, 969, are said to have lived for centuries, symbolizing a closer divine connection or a different era, Genesis 5. The turning point. Just before the flood, God declares in Genesis 6, verse 3, "My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years." This is often interpreted as God imposing a limit on human life to curb wickedness, which had led to the flood, Genesis 6 verses 5 to 7. However, some scholars argue this 120-year reference is not a lifespan cap, but the time remaining until the flood itself. As post-flood figures like Noah, who lived 350 years after the flood, totaling 950, exceeded initially. Post-flood decline. After the flood, Genesis chapters 8 and 9, lifespans gradually shorten among Noah's descendants. Genesis 11. Shem, Noah's son, 600 years. Arphaxad, 438 years. Eber, 464 years. Peleg, 239 years. Terah, Abraham's father, 205 years. Abraham, 175 years. Later figures like Isaac, 180, Jacob, 147, and Moses, 120, approach modern norms. This progressive decline continues until biblical lifespans align with typical human ages, like David at 70 years in 2 Samuel 5, verse 4. The narrative then shifts to humanity repopulating the earth. With events like the Tower of Babel, Genesis 11, verses 1 to 9, where shorter lives might contribute to scattering and cultural diversification, as people couldn't accumulate as much power or knowledge over centuries. In Islamic tradition, Quran and Hadith, Noah's story emphasizes his long preaching, 950 years per Surah Al-Ankabut, Surah 29, verse 14. But there's no explicit post-flood lifespan limit. However, later prophets like Abraham and Moses have normal-length lives, implying a similar normalization without direct causation tied to the flood. Theological explanations for why lifespans shortened. Religious interpretations view this not as a random happening, but as purposeful divine intervention. Common reasons include limiting the spread of evil. Pre-flood humanity's longevity allowed sin and corruption to fester deeply. Genesis 6, verses 11 to 13. By shortening lives to 120 years max, God mercifully prevented individuals from amassing excessive wickedness, ensuring righteousness could persist in society. This acts as a check on human rebellion, similar to how the flood reset the world. Encouraging hope and redemption. Long lives pre-flood highlighted humanity's fall from Edenic perfection. Shorter spans post-flood remind people of mortality, urging them to seek God's mercy, eternal life, and salvation, like through faith in Christ in Christian views. It fosters a longing for redemption rather than self-reliance. Environmental or genetic factors. Speculative. Some creationist theories suggest the flood altered the Earth's atmosphere, for example, collapsing a water canopy that shielded from radiation, increasing mutations and aging. Others point to a genetic bottleneck. With only Noah's family surviving, inbreeding or lost genetic diversity led to quicker aging. These are not biblically explicit, but attempt to reconcile faith with science. Symbolic or numeric significance. Ages might represent eras, dynasties or moral lessons rather than literal years, like using lunar calendars or numerology, with the decline illustrating spiritual decay. Consequences in the broader narrative after the lifespan shortening. Humanity's spread and challenges. Shorter lives meant faster generational turnover, leading to rapid population growth and migration, Genesis 10-11. This set the stage for nations, languages, and conflicts, like the division at Babel. Shift in focus to covenant and law. With mortality more evident, God's interactions emphasize covenants, like with Abraham in Genesis 12-17, and laws, for example, Mosaic law, guiding shorter-lived humans toward ethical living and eternal hope. Modern implications. In faith traditions, it underscores life's brevity. Psalm chapter 90, verses 10-12. The years of our life are 70. Teach us to number our days, encouraging purpose, repentance, and preparation for afterlife. No one in recorded history has exceeded 122 years, aligning with the biblical cap. Scientific and skeptical perspectives. From a non-religious viewpoint, these stories are mythological. With no archaeological evidence for a global flood, 4,000, 5,000 years ago, or sudden lifespan changes. Human evolution shows consistent biological limits due to cellular aging, like Hayflick limit, and ancient skeletons indicate maximums of 70-90 years for survivors. Claims of pre-flood longevity are seen as symbolic or exaggerated oral traditions, similar to other myths. For example, Sumerian kings living 20,000 plus years.
since we have not yet fully explored the depths of the oceans. It is possible that future discoveries such as human skulls or remains could provide evidence of longer lifespans, potentially supporting religious claims. Given that science has not yet examined every part of the earth, can it reasonably dismiss such religious assertions simply because no evidence has been found so far?
You're raising a fair point about the limits of exploration and how absence of evidence doesn't necessarily prove something didn't happen. It's true that much of the Earth's oceans remain unexplored, and future discoveries could theoretically uncover new artifacts or remains. However, science doesn't outright deny religious claims like those of long-lived humans, like Adam or Noah living centuries. It simply doesn't accept them as factual without verifiable evidence, while current data from biology, genetics, and archaeology strongly points against literal interpretations. I'll break this down step by step, addressing your ocean exploration angle and the broader scientific reasoning. Status of ocean exploration and potential for discoveries. Yes, the oceans are vastly underexplored. According to estimates from organizations like NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and Oceana, only about 20–25% of the ocean floor has been mapped at a resolution detailed enough to identify features like shipwrecks or geological formations. Visually, humans have directly observed or seen less than 0.001% of the deep sea floor, equivalent to an area about the size of Rhode Island for the entire global ocean. The remaining to 75–80%, or 99.9999% in terms of direct observation, includes deep trenches, mid-ocean ridges, and abyssal plains that are challenging to access due to pressure, darkness, and cost. Future tech like autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, advanced sonar, or deep-sea submersibles, e.g. from projects like Seabed 2030, could reveal more. We've already found unexpected things in the oceans, like ancient shipwrecks, hydrothermal vents teeming with life, and even submerged human settlements from the Ice Age. For example, off the coast of Israel or in the Black Sea, dating back 10,000+ years. So, in theory, human remains or artifacts could turn up in unexplored areas, perhaps from flooded ancient sites or natural disasters. That said, finding skulls or skeletons in the ocean wouldn't automatically validate religious claims of centuries-long lifespans. We'd need to analyze them for age-at-death indicators, like bone density, dental wear, or DNA markers of aging. And so far, no such evidence has emerged from any explored site, oceanic or terrestrial. Current scientific evidence on human longevity, from what we have explored, land-based sites, shallow coastal areas, and some deep-sea samples, there's no evidence of humans living for centuries. Archaeologists have examined over 6,000 Homo sapiens fossils and skeletons from sites worldwide, dating back 300,000+ years, like from Ethiopia's Omo Valley or Morocco's Jebel Irhoud. These show maximum lifespans around 70–90 years for adults who survived childhood, with averages much lower due to disease and hardship. For instance, a 2016 study of 2,000 ancient Roman skeletons found no one exceeding typical modern old age, and Paleolithic remains, 30,000+ years old, cap at similar limits. Biologically, human evolution has extended our lifespans beyond great apes, who rarely exceed 50 years, but not to centuries. Modern genetics shows limits due to telomere shortening, cellular damage, and diseases of aging, factors that would prevent 900+ years without fundamental changes to human physiology. Even if ocean discoveries yielded ancient remains, they'd likely align with this pattern, as human biology hasn't changed dramatically in the last 200,000 years. Speculative explanations for religious longevity, like pre-flood environments or perfect genetics, lack supporting evidence and contradict known paleoclimate data or DNA studies. Why science doesn't accept these claims yet? Science operates on the principle that the burden of proof lies with the person or claim making an assertion, especially for extraordinary claims that contradict established knowledge. Carl Sagan popularized the idea that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, meaning something like humans living 900 years, which defies biology, needs robust, testable proof to be taken seriously, not just the possibility of hidden evidence. Science isn't denying religious claims. It's withholding acceptance until evidence appears. This is how the scientific method works. Hypotheses must be falsifiable and supported by data. For example, if someone claims unicorns exist but we haven't found them because the forests are unexplored, science wouldn't affirm it. It would say, "Show us the evidence." Similarly, religious texts make the positive claim of long lifespans, so the onus is on proving it, not on science to disprove it everywhere, which is impossible, as you can't prove a negative universally. Incomplete exploration doesn't validate the claims by default. We've explored enough of the planet, for example 100% of land surfaces plus coastal oceans, to have a representative sample of human history, and nothing supports centuries-long lives. If ocean finds contradicted this, science would update. It's provisional, not dogmatic. In essence, religions can hold these claims as matters of faith, symbolism, or divine truth beyond empirical proof. And that's valid in a spiritual context. But science requires evidence to integrate them into our understanding of history or biology. If deep-sea explorations, ongoing via initiatives like OceanX or NOAA's expeditions, do uncover something revolutionary, it could shift the conversation. But based on what's known now, the claims remain unsubstantiated empirically.
As we surface from these depths, remember, science illuminates what's known but leaves room for the unknown, those uncharted ocean trenches that might one day rewrite our story. Yet faith thrives in the mysteries where long lives symbolize divine promise, not just bones in the deep. Whether you see these ancient claims as eternal truths or epic poetry, they remind us to cherish our fleeting years. Until next time on Echoes of Eternity, keep questioning, keep exploring. What secrets does tomorrow's tide hold? This is your host Zahid, signing off.